Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Debrief on ABC News Live. I'm Kimberly Brooks. Thanks so much for joining us. We're giving you the latest on the migrant children in the unsanitary detention centers at the border. Plus, we're talking to a school counselor who was fired from her job for being in a same-sex marriage at a Catholic church. And of course, we're checking in on the Women's World Cup. But first, here are your headlines.
Police in Chicago have now released video of actor Jussie Smollett from the night he says he was attacked.
Any weapons or anything inside the apartment?
Chicago police releasing this new video showing the moment officers respond to Jussie Smollett's report of an assault. Smollett seen here still wearing the noose he claims his attackers put around his neck.
Do you want to take it off or anything? Yeah, I do. I just want to see it.
Police then informed the actor a police body camera is recording their exchange.
There's a bleach movie.
Smollett is then heard asking the officers to turn the camera off.
I don't want to be filmed.
This is part of some 69 hours of surveillance and other images released by Chicago police in response to media requests, including ABC News.
A vacation in the Bahamas turned disastrous when a bus packed with tourists flipped over. 26 people were injured. They were part of an excursion from a Carnival cruise ship. Authorities are looking into what caused that crash. 4 people had to be flown to Florida in a military cargo plane because their injuries were so serious. More charges are coming against this woman who threw a burning towel into her neighbor's house. That came after she was seen firing gunshots into the house.
Police near Oklahoma City say she'll face arson and weapons charges. They say she was involved in a feud with her neighbors over alleged drug use.
SpaceX launched its heaviest rocket yet early this morning.
The SpaceX Falcon rocket soared off the launch pad at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida early this morning. SpaceX called it the most difficult launch ever because it was done in the dark for the first time, and the rocket used boosters from previous missions.
We begin with a crisis that has captured the attention of the country. The awful conditions at detention centers in Texas, impacting children, some just infants. A reminder, they were being held, separated from parents for weeks with no soap, no water, sick, sleeping on concrete floors with the lights on for 24 hours a day. So take a listen to a doctor who was horrified by what she saw.
I mean, there are federal guidelines for basic sanitation for everything, for, permitting health department, for daycares, for schools, probably even for juvenile detention centers. This felt worse than jail. It just felt, lawless. I hate to be extreme there, but that's what it felt like. I believe the conditions at these facilities are placing them at increased risk for infection, disease, and death. I believe the 24-hour lights are causing permanent damage to the development of their young brains.
So after the backlash, the U.S. government has removed most of the children from the station. So I want to bring in Marcus Moore in Dallas, Texas. Marcus, what's the latest on these kids being removed? Where are they going?
Well, Kimberly, we know that the children have been moved, and they were supposed to be at different facilities with HHS by today, but we don't know exactly where all of these children were moved to. We're talking about at least 250 children who have been moved to different facilities. And the distinction here, Kimberly, when we talk about these facilities, they were being held at Customs and Border Protection processing centers. Those are centers that are not meant to be housing facilities for an extended period of time. For example, these people, these minors, were supposed to be in these facilities for no more than 72 hours. But according to the attorneys and the activists who have been trying to check on their condition and their treatment, many of them, after interviewing them, they learned that they had been in these processing centers for anywhere from 4 to 24 days. So we're talking about some of them for 3 weeks they had been there, enduring conditions, as you heard the doctor mentioning there, lights on for 24 hours. Also, apparently no access to basic necessities like soap, and being held in extremely cold conditions inside those facilities. So that is what these children were dealing with, and they have since been moved as they many of them were seeking asylum and hoping to be reunited with either family members who they were separated from when they crossed over the border, or with relatives who are already here in the U.S., and those would be the next steps. But as you've heard that doctor mention there, the conditions that many of them were enduring have been the source of controversy and criticism that we have now seen steps have been taken to move them to more comfortable settings.
Yeah, and Marcus, we still know that there's a record-breaking number of unaccompanied children still making the trek. You actually spent time with one of the caravans. What was your takeaway from spending time with them?
Well, yeah, that's right, Kimberly. Not only did we spend time with many of the migrants from Central America, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador during the migrant caravan that we heard so much about, we also saw one of the processing facilities along the Texas-Mexico border. And I can tell you that what I have seen is that there is still a constant flow of migrants who are trying to reach the U.S., many of them seeking asylum, others trying to cross illegally across the border in the dark of night with smugglers. And it gives you a sense that this is still going on, Kimberly, and that this is far from over. And you're talking about the tens of thousands of migrants who have been apprehended at the border just this year. Some 50,000 of those, Kimberly, are unaccompanied minors. That is an astronomical number, and so far this fiscal year we're talking about 50,000, and that's close to the record-breaking surge that we saw several years ago, I think in 2014, where there were more than almost 70,000 unaccompanied migrants apprehended at the border. So we still see these numbers, and you get a sense that the facilities that are trying to process and house the many thousands of migrants, that they at this point are stretched thin and are really facing a challenge trying to deal with these massive amounts of migrants trying to get into the U.S.
All right, Marcus Moore, right there in Dallas, Texas. Thank you so much. And immigration is sure to be a big topic at this week's Democratic debate, and we've got full coverage of it all. It's going to be starting tomorrow at 11 p.m. Eastern, so make sure you check that out. And guys, we turn to Iran. President Hassan Rouhani calling new U.S. sanctions outrageous and idiotic, and describing the White House as afflicted by mental retardation. So I want to bring in James Longman on the ground in United Arab Emirates. James, we know that President Trump just responded to Iran's comments. What do we know about this?
Well, yeah, Kimberly, we haven't seen any military action yet, but the war of words is certainly in full swing. As you say, those comments from Hassan Rouhani and now President Trump on Twitter in a succession of tweets saying that those comments were ignorant and insulting. He then brandished U.S. military power, outlining just what the United States had in this region in terms of its military capabilities, and then issuing a stark threat saying any attack by Iran on anything American will be met with great and overwhelming force. In some areas, overwhelming will mean obliteration. And, you know, we've heard this sort of rhetoric before from Donald Trump and from Iran. I mean, I think we've heard it before from other places like North Korea. And famously, at the end of all of that back and forth between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, well, there was the North Korea summit. And I think that is what Donald Trump would like to see happen here. That's what he says time and time again. He wants negotiation. He wants Iran to come to the table to talk about their nuclear program, but also to withdraw their support for terrorist organizations. That's the term that the US uses across the Middle East. But this region is expecting Iran to react in some way. It's expecting that rhetoric to turn into military action, because there are so many places where Iran could focus its military capabilities. Just up the road from where I am here in Fujairah, there is a US base. The US Fifth Fleet sits in Bahrain. There is a US base in Cyprus. There is Afghanistan. They basically encircle Iran in many ways, I think probably in the hope of, keeping Iran in check. But in many ways, they also act as a target for Iran. So that is a very real possibility. Added, of course, to the possibility that Iran could hit another tanker on the Strait of Hormuz, near where I am right now, another limpet mine on a tanker, indeed, possibly even setting up a blockade of the strait. that would send oil prices rocketing. That's something that Donald Trump actively does not want to happen. So there are all sorts of ways Iran could react. We're just here waiting to see if they actually follow through on any of them.
Yeah, I just have to ask you, is the diplomacy shut down because President Trump, he wants to negotiate? He's saying that, and Iran has said that these new sanctions spell permanent closure. So what does that mean?
Well, I think we see these things happening time and time again. There is often the rhetoric. We have to see whether or not it actually comes to fruition. Donald Trump has said that he doesn't even need Congress if he wants to go to war. That's not strictly true. I mean, presidents often talk about having to protect the national interest of the United States. And actually, we saw Donald Trump taking military action in Syria without congressional approval or the approval of the United Nations Security Council. There's also the possibility that he could use legislation that was brought in after the September 11th attack. That is called the Authorization for the Use of Military Force, and that is used currently against Al-Qaeda and its affiliates in the region. I think it would be a bit of a stretch if it was to use that. But we always talk about the possibility of war being up to America. Well, in this case, it might be that Iran is pushing for war and the United States has no choice but to act. We know that if anything unites Congress, really at this stage, it's their skepticism about military action in the Middle East, but that might not matter in the end. Currently, Iran is selling something like 300,000 barrels of oil, 300,000 barrels of oil a day, sorry. Normally 1.5 million. It is way down on what it should be producing around the world. These sanctions are hurting Iran, and it won't sit and watch these sanctions for much longer. So we will wait and see if they lash out. A lot of people watching the Middle East tonight, they think that will happen at some stage. Kimberly?
All right, James Longman right there in the UAE. Thank you so much for joining us with the updates. We appreciate it. And in the meantime, President Trump is facing new sexual assault allegations from New York Times writer E. Jean Carroll over an encounter in 1995, making her one of over a dozen women who have accused the president of sexual misconduct. And President Trump's response, quote, says, I'll say it with great respect. Number one, she's not my type. Number two, it never happened. So I want to bring in Mona Kosar-Abdi at the White House. Mona, let's just start with his comment that she was not his type. That's not the first time he's criticized an accuser like that, right?
Kimberly, it's not the first time that he has rejected claims of sexual misconduct or sexual assault by saying the accuser is just not his type or not attractive enough for him to engage in such behavior. Back in 2016 at a campaign rally, the president said of a woman who accused him of groping her on a plane that she would, quote, not be my first choice. Now, in response to his latest comments, Carroll laughed off the president's remarks and said, I'm glad I'm not his type. But she said that she believes in those 5 minutes, some 23 years ago, she was the most attractive person at that New York City department store. In her book, in her forthcoming book, Carroll describes the alleged assault, writing that Trump was, quote, forcing himself on her inside that dressing room. She says he slammed her head against the wall and that a struggle ensued and she was assaulted before running out of that dressing room. Now, Carroll says she never reported the incident to police, but ABC News has spoke to two of her friends who said that she did confide in them shortly after the alleged incident, but they did want to remain anonymous. Again, the president denies Carroll's allegations and says she is just trying to sell her book.
And how have Republicans responded to this, and where does President Trump go from here? I mean, obviously, it's campaign season. You know, this might impact it in some degree.
Right. The president has, people have said that the president has been revisiting his 2016 campaign. And just like his 2016 campaign, it seems there's another allegation of sexual misconduct or sexual assault. Republicans have remained largely silent on Carroll's accusations. But moments ago, we heard from Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. We heard from House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, both saying the same thing, that they believe President Trump. But again, their silence hasn't gone unnoticed, because in a Washington Post op-ed, George Conway, Kellyanne Conway's husband, said that it would be hypocritical of Republicans who believed Juanita Broaddrick's allegations against President Bill Clinton, who was then governor, to not condemn Trump. So a lot of people are just waiting to see what kind of reaction Republicans have. So far, the two top Republicans in Congress have said that they believe President Trump. All
right, Mona Kosar-Abdi at the White House, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate it. And guys, as we talked about yesterday, Mayor Pete Buttigieg taking lots of heat in South Bend, Indiana, after outrage in the Black community over the shooting death of Eric Logan by a white police officer earlier this month. Anger that has been building from years of distrust between the police department and the Black community because of corruption and brutality and racism. It's a common refrain in many cities across the country. For instance, in Philadelphia, where 72 cops were removed from the streets for racist and offensive social media posts. So I want to bring in Captain Sonia Pruitt with the Montgomery Police Department in Maryland. Sonia, you know, situations like Philadelphia are very validating for these communities because it shows that what they've been feeling is actually a reality in some cases, right?
That is true. It doesn't look good at all, but this is not a new problem. This is something that's been going on for years and years, especially since the advent of social media. And, you know, it's hard to control because we're not only human beings, but we're citizens, and we do have First Amendment rights. But, you know, police departments are struggling with how to define what's reasonable and what's not for a police officer.
Yeah, so police departments are very protective of their own, and we get it, but incidents like this have to make your job harder. How do you balance loyalty to the badge while you're making sure that, you know, police don't get painted with the broad brush, because there are bad apples, you know?
Yeah. And so I think that the solution to that is to acknowledge that there are bad apples and then do something about that. What's really standing out for me in this particular case with these Facebook posts is that we've heard nothing from groups like the Fraternal Order of Police or the National Association of Police Organizations. I mean, where are their voices? I mean, they're very quick to speak out when they think an officer is being treated unfairly. But what about when our citizenry is treated unfairly? Because, you know, we work for the citizens, you know, of this country, and they want us to do the right thing. And so we need support to be able to do that. You know, we have policies in most police departments, and I see where several of these departments are actually conducting investigations, which is good. But there is a culture that allows for this type of behavior, and that's really where we need to do the work.
I'm just curious, you know, as a Black police officer, how do you work to bridge the gap between your community while you're wearing the uniform?
Well, you know, this is funny because most people really do love the police, including Black communities. But what they really want from the police is honest and authentic and courageous conversation and action. Not acknowledging that there is a problem is a problem. And so if we were able to speak more honestly about the issues and where they actually come from, the history of policing in this country that started with slavery, and now here we are, and we have people of color and people who are of different sexualities and different religions that are being talked about as though somehow they are still beneath the police, which is where we started at in this country. So we need to have those conversations, and then we need to take action when people do things that are wrong and shed a negative light on the police.
All right, Captain Sonia Pruitt right there in Maryland. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yes. So do you guys remember that story that I told you last week about the Archdiocese of a Catholic school in Indianapolis that wanted to fire a teacher in a same-sex marriage? The reason was so the school could maintain its Catholic identity. Well, the school refused to fire that teacher, but apparently it wasn't a one-off situation. Another school in that diocese went ahead and fired a teacher for the same reason later that week. It's happened several times, and our next guest, Shelly Fitzgerald, she's a high school counselor in this same district. She was fired in August, and so we're going to talk to her. And I also want to bring in Reverend James Martin, a Jesuit priest and editor-at-large for American Media. Shelly, you were working at this school for 15 years. What went through your mind when they said that they were going to terminate you for this reason?
Well, not only did I work at the school, but I also attended school there. So I've been a part of that community for the majority of my life. When, you know, back in August when this happened to me, I think that my immediate reaction was just one of real sadness, of just a disheartening feeling of being disowned by the community that you've grown up in and loved and trusted.
Yeah, it's interesting. The school actually put out a statement that I'm sure you've seen. It says the issue concerning Miss Fitzgerald's employment is not about sexual orientation, but about the church's teaching that marriage is a covenant between a man and a woman as established and revealed by God. What did you think of that statement?
Well, I heard that statement, and what I would say is that, when we're not enforcing a policy that everybody signs off on, and when we're just targeting one specific group of people, that's blatant discrimination.
Yeah, and Reverend James, I want to bring you in here about this statement, because the church cites the Bible as the reason for firing people in same-sex marriage. You cite the scripture for everyone to be inclusive. Tell us why. How does this work?
Well, Shelly is right. It's discriminatory. If you're going to fire someone for being in a same-sex marriage, you can fire people for all sorts of reasons. You can fire straight married couples for using birth control, for using in vitro fertilization. You can fire people who are divorced. And then more broadly, if you are firing people who don't follow church teaching, follow the Catholic Church teaching, you can fire all Protestants and Jews and Muslims and Hindus and agnostics and atheists. So Shelly is right. It's completely discriminatory. It's just targeting the LGBT employee, and it really needs to stop.
Yeah, one tweet, I was looking at your tweets earlier, and one that stuck out to me is you were saying what would happen if every LGBT church employee was fired or quit their job. You said basically the entire institution would simply grind to a halt, suggesting that there's a lot of gay and lesbian people that are in this community, yes?
Absolutely. There are a lot of LGBT teachers and people who work in parishes and rectories and in bishops' offices. And so, we really can't just target these people simply because we don't like who they are. And once again, if you're going to target people for not following church teaching, that's going to get rid of, a huge group of people. And, it's just discriminatory to pick on one person. I think it's really mean. I think that's a word that we have to resurrect in the discussion here. It's just mean to focus on this one group.
Do you get any backlash from having this viewpoint? All of these schools and different churches, really abiding by the fact that same-sex marriage shouldn't exist. Do you get backlash from thinking the opposite?
Yeah, of course I do. But I point out to them how selective it is. Again, if you're going to fire people like that, you need to fire all divorced people. Jesus came out against divorce in the Gospels. It's pretty clear. And we don't do that because we're tolerant and we're inclusive and we understand people in the complexity of their lives. The only person that gets their sexual life put under a moral microscope is the LGBT person.
And Shelly, just curious, where does your situation stand now? I also I learned that you were the Grand Marshal in the Indianapolis Pride Parade, which I think is really awesome. But where is the situation now in terms of your employment?
Well, I have been notified that I will not be renewed. My contract will not be renewed next year. So my termination with the Archdiocese is complete. And right now, my focus, personally, is just to continue being a catalyst for change, to bringing the community together of Indianapolis, but ultimately, the community of Catholics or people who are looking for, faith-based place to live, just discrimination in general. My fight now is to just ensure that people are included, that people feel loved, and that people have someone to stand up for them.
All right, so I want to thank Shelly Fitzgerald and Reverend James Martin for joining us today. We appreciate all of this. And guys, we're moving on to the Women's World Cup. The Team U.S. winning a nail-biter against Spain 2-1, thanks to a pair of penalty goals from stars Megan Rapinoe. So for more, I want to bring in Kate Graf, a former player for Team USA that's now with ESPN. Kate, that was a close one. What's your biggest takeaway?
Hi, Kimberly. It's good to chat with you. My biggest takeaway is the U.S. can win really pretty games like we saw in the group stage, but they can also win the gritty games, the more physical games. And the ones, as a fan and you're watching, you're like, wait, I thought this was going to be easy. But this was a sign that the World Cup, the knockout stages have finally arrived and every game is going to be close.
All right. And so what should we be looking to moving forward? What's exciting about the next matches?
Well, if you don't have plans on Friday, or if you do, cancel them, because you're going to be seeing one of the most exciting games in women's soccer to date. It's the World Cup reigning champs, the U.S., versus the World Cup hosts. Both teams can win this. Two of the most explosive, attacking, physically fast, technical teams in the tournament, and they have to face each other earlier on in the tournament than we all hoped. We all hoped this would happen in the finals, but how the brackets worked out, we knew that this could potentially happen, and it is.
Yeah, and so I just want to ask you quickly about what's going on with the pay gap, because, you know, people have spoken out about that. You used to play on the team. What do you make of all of this?
You know, I used to be in charge of the CBA and the collective bargaining agreements with our national team and the federation, and I can always tell you that there are so many nuances that it's hard to get in a soundbite. But right now we know that both sides, U.S. Soccer and the Players Association for the women, have decided to mediate following the World Cup. U.S. Soccer was not happy that this news had come out during the day before this match against Spain, but it's good news that they are talking, they're at the same table, and it kind of quiets this whole distraction, in my opinion, away from the team, and so they can just focus on the performance.
All right, so we're all going to be watching. I want to thank you, Kate Graf, right there for ESPN. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. And guys, as you know, we've been covering Pride all month, and this is Pride Week. It's a week of celebrations, parades, and reflection and education. And we're highlighting people who are making a real difference in the LGBTQ community. So I'm joined by AC Dumlau, the founder of Call Me They, a Facebook page that draws attention to transgender and non-binary issues. So AC, what's going on? I wanna ask you what prompted you to start this work.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Kimberly.
Yes.
And this work really started out of a place of wanting to speak out for marginalized communities, underrepresented communities, particularly as a transgender, non-binary person myself, as well as a Filipino-American person and person of color. Under this administration, we have been hearing a lot of negative things, hurtful, discriminatory things, and I wanted to be a voice and to highlight voices that were being repressed and not heard, and that's how Call Me They came to be.
Absolutely. So it's a Facebook page. What has the response been? Because you have like 10,000 followers on this page, so pretty incredible.
The response has been amazing. It started around the time of Trump's inauguration on purpose. I wanted to start that page in response to all of the news stories going on. And since then, it's just skyrocketed. It's given me opportunities that I never thought that I would have to be able to speak at schools and colleges across the country, to give trainings at some of the biggest businesses in the U.S. And it's overwhelmingly been so positive, and I've connected to people not just across the U.S. but across the world.
What's the main thing that you want people to know? Like, you started Call Me They. What do you want people to extract from it?
I want people to know that non-binary people exist. So non-binary people are people who do not identify strictly as male nor female, like myself. And I think that I come across some people thinking that there can only be two genders, there can only be male and female, but we exist. And genders beyond the gender binary have existed from the beginning of time. If you look at indigenous folks, Two-Spirit, you may have heard that term. Mm-hmm. Those kinds of genders have existed across the world. Today, it's really exciting. The Pew Research Center put out a study that said that 1/3 of Gen Z knows a non-binary person.
Wow.
And so that visibility continues to grow, and I hope to be one of the many voices representing this community.
And you are a good voice, because AC was also named one of NYC Pride's community heroes and will be in the parade on June 30th, which we will be covering. So I really appreciate you for joining us. This is fantastic. Guys, more Pride coverage, as I said, June 30th. Coverage begins at 11 a.m. for right here on ABC News Live. So check that out and continue to take care of yourselves. And if you're around today, check out the briefing room at 3:30 p.m. Then check out World News Prime at 8 p.m. And if you want to stay updated on all of these headlines, you can go to abcnews.com or download the app. I'm Kimberly Brooks, and I'll see you tomorrow.